Okay. Namaskar. I'm Dr. Nalini Avinash Wagmare, working as Associate Professor at Tirak Maharashtra Vidyapit, Pune. Today's our topic is related to Roman historiography. So, Roman historiographers are far behind the Greek. Their writings did not have as much sharpness and perception as the Greek. Therefore, Roman are supposed no parallel to the Greek. Romans proved to be merely imitative and pragmatic. They did not pay any attention to the art of writing history for a long time. Consequently, they failed to produce any historian of the level of Herodotus and Thucydides. Then comparison of Roman historiography in detail we see in the last slide also. The Romans did not make any contribution in the field of historiography. The style of Greek historians was very attractive and they possessed analytical approach which is quite evident in their works. The Greek had depth of thought. They loved writing of history very much and had a belief that history was philosophy. In their works, they emphasize on writing of true events without any partiality. While the Romans were not original writers, they were mostly descriptive, largely political, and invariably utilitarian in outlook. Actually, the Romans borrowed history from Greece, and they were deeply impressed and influenced by the Greek in writing history. Until the Second Punic War, the Romans did not pay attention to the writing of history. They only started writing history after they had studied the works of Herodotus and Thucydides. Having been inspired by the work of Greek, they began to record their achievements. Phoebus Pector. Phoebus Pector was the earliest Roman historian. He was born around 254 BC. In his annals, he had described the history of Rome from the days of Anarus to his own time. His family had their own archives, so he consulted all the official documents which were available there. In his book of history, he had only described the lifestyle and living of the nobles and great men and paid no attention to the problems of the common man of his time. Phoebus Pictor. But it was not the fault of Pictor because during the period of history was supposed to be study of the life of great men. Hence he also devoted his attention to the nobles of that day and ignored the common men altogether. But it did not mean that the history written by Phoebus Pictor to be on no use. It actually the great importance as a source of information for the later Greek and Roman historians who devoted themselves to the task of writing history. M. Porcus Cato. Cato is considered to be the father of Roman historiography. With his coming, the character of Roman historiography changed. B. Sheikh Ali mentioned about him, he was a prolific writer and, like Herodotus, the first real Latin prose writer. He was a great public figure, having been a quested, a audible, a parator, a consul, and a censor. He is mostly known by the last office he held as the Cato the censor. His chief work, Origins, was written in 7 volumes. In this book, he has dealt only the political conditions and did not refer to the social one of the Romans during that time. The language was also not familiar to the one which was used during his time. Cato was industrious person. He attained high position among the historians due to his hard work and faced all the difficulties and odds very bravely. He belonged to an ordinary family of peasants. He managed to write a book of history, but he did not refer the name of the commander in the beginning. He merely wrote that some commander of the Roman army attained such and such victory. He also gave the credit of the victory in Roman wars to the common soldiers instead of the commanders. Cato, he felt that the Roman soldiers were brave and well disciplined, and therefore they achieved victory in the Roman wars. P. Shekere also mentioned that it is this democratic spirit opposing credit to the common soldier that prompted him to take such a line action. He took the ground that Romans' battles were won by the common soldiers and that it was unjust to give the glory to the general. Cato, being the first great historian of Rome, established a new school. During his period, the theme of writing began to be limited and use of effective literary expression came to be introduced. Consequently, historical memories appeared on scene in 100 BC. Then Suelius Antipater, he was also a famous Roman historian who devoted himself to the writing of history and selected Second Punic War as the subject matter of his works. He did not pay much attention towards the writing of the Roman history. He did not make use of original sources while writing history. Rather, he devoted himself to the works of other Greek and Latin writers. In this way, it is evident that there was no originality in his writings. Actually, his writings were primarily based on Cato, Fabius, etc. earlier writers. Vara. Varro is another significant writer of Roman history who deserved to be quoted here. He was born in 116 BC and thus he was senior to Cicero. He was keenly interested in their political activities. His famous work, Roman Antiquities, was published in 47 BC in 41 volumes. Out of these 41 volumes, 25 were devoted to human antiquities, while 16 referred to divine antiquities. He did not lay stress on the interconnection among various facts. Unfortunately, the first 25 volumes pertaining to the human antiquities have been lost and only 16 volumes of divine antiquities are available. Thus, the present posterity is deprived of his 25 significant works. Julius Caesar. Among the historians of the Roman historiography, Julius Caesar was very prominent. He was not merely statesman, but also a great poet, historian, and a great genius. He produced the best historical memories of the ancient world entitled Commentaries on the Gallic War. In order to justify himself before the Roman people, he discussed military relations and propagated his views and described the events of war vividly, along with the manners and customs of the people of Rome. His style of writing was always clear, forceful, and direct. Professor Bernays also mentioned his commentaries are almost as important for our knowledge of pre-Roman Gallic as his Tacitus. Germania for information about pre-Roman Germany. After his assassination in Rome, writing of history continued by the historians who appeared on the stage after him. So Gaius Salicius after the expiry of Julius Caesar, Sallust occupied a significant position in the field of Roman historiography. He was a true discipline of Greek historian Thucydides. In fact, he was one of the systematic Roman historians. His chief work was History of Rome from 78 to 67 BC. No copy of his History of Rome is available now, but his two monographs known as Conspiracy of Catiline and Eurythine Wars are available, which clearly shows his power in the analysis of personalities and political forces. The scholars opine that his writing was impartial and he had an objective approach, but he was not very sincere about the chronology and geography. Then he had often been criticized for his shortcomings, and scholars have created various problems for the historians that followed him. However, James T. Shotwell remarks about him, Sallustius stands out distinctly above his predecessors and remains with Livy and Tacitus, one of the three best known Latin historians. The reason is mainly that he applied to Rome the standards of Thucydides and Polybius, whom he took as the masters and cutting off a drift from the current and complacent radical compositions, honestly tried to tell the truth. Moreover, in style as well as in content, he held himself aloof from the florid or rhetorical traditions, wrote with dignity, and gave a certain fitting, organic flavor to his narrative. Then Livy. Besides being an outstanding Roman historian, Livy enjoyed a distinct place in Roman historiography. Like his contemporary Tacitus, he has been called the Herodotus and Thucydides of Rome. Livy was born at Padua and spent most of his time in Rome. He wrote his works under the patronage of August. His first book of history appeared in 29 BC. In the preface of his book, he divided Roman history in two parts, the ancient and the modern. His entire work was divided in 142 books, which is a clear proof of his ability and capability. Unfortunately, 35 books of Livy are available and the rest have been lost. Professor Collingwood mentions about his work that to assemble the traditional records of early Roman history and weld them together into a single continuous narrative, the history of Rome was a clear indication of his ability, but he never claimed to originality in his writings. What was the style of Livy? Livy possessed vast knowledge of history and there was sufficient clarity in his writings. He taught his readers through the lessons of past and endeavored to put before the readers the traditional records of the early Roman history. He produced a very clear picture before his readers. His narrative is quite clear and attractive. Like Thucydides, he made history dialectic. Functions of history. Livy was of the opinion that history is not only recording of events, but also a narration in a very clear and lucid way. It has some definite functions to perform. It helps in the development of morals and patriotism. It also makes them disciplined. It also inspires the people to develop them as good citizens. History also adds to the promotion of utilitarian feelings among the people. No doubt Livy was one of the greatest historians of Rome. Besides having a command over his narrations, he had a great descriptive power which is not available in all the historians. He was lover of writing biographies. Though he was not a critical scholar, there were contradiction and chronological errors in his writings. However, Professor Shotwell mentions about him. Apart from its vastness, the conception which underlay the history of Livy was so consistently developed. The outlines of his structure so clear and so harmonious that it is hardly too much to say that it was the impress which he gave to the history of the Republic that lasted down to the days of Niebuhr and the 19th century critics. He carried the idea of fated missions of Rome as the unifying center of the civilized world back across centuries of its obscurity and link together past, present, and future in one culminating perspective. Because of his ability and efficiency in writing history, Livy enjoyed a significant position among the writers of the Roman period. He was the only historian who had the privilege of having personal acquaintance with the emperor. In fact, his strength and charm as a writer was based upon his gift to vivid narration. Livy because of his ability and sufficient writing, Livy enjoyed a significant position among the writers of the Roman period. He was the only historian who had the privilege of having personal acquaintance with the emperor. In fact, his strength and charm as a writer was based upon his gift for vivid narration. Then Tacitus, also a significant position among the historians. He had been named as Roman Thucydides by some of the scholars' annals, histories, dialogue on orators, life Agricola are some of his very important works. Annals was his chief historical works in which he mentioned former the death of August to the year 69 8. He was a great lover of old republican institutions and he represented the attitude of the senatorial class. Senatorial class. His another work, Histories, also covered the period from the crisis 669 AD, also Lebanese emperor. He was very competent author in portrait of personalities. His works, Germania, was one of the earliest works of descriptive sociology. It deals with German institutions of the contemporary time. Some of the scholars define that there was much originality in his writings about others, mention that his source material was borrowed from the Greek historian. Then what was style of writing? Tacitus, the method of writing was like that of an orator. He had tried to imitate others and en- inquired in order to explain phenomena. He had a critical bent of mind and analyzed the events before including them in his works. He was a successful psychologist and a great judge of character. He criticized the person without any fear or hesitation and discussed the intricate issues very deeply. H. E. Burns also remarks about him. The works of Tacitus suffered from lack of a broad plan, such as which guided Polybius, coupled with a mass of somewhat confusing details. Hence, the forest of Roman imperial evolution is observed by the trees of personal episode and the complicated maze of current intrigues and Partian actions. Quillingwood also mentioned about his works. Then Shortwells also mention antiquity that it is history highest function to let no worthy action be unrecommended. So he also praised his works. To sum up it, we may conclude that he was certainly a great scholar and a sharp mind. First, he endeavored to understand the motives of the great personalities of history, and then, after making thorough study of their character, he wrote about them. His works were therefore full of ideas and philosophical factors. Despite all the shortcomings in his personality and writings, he was one of the prominent Roman historiographers. Then Tancredulus also belonged to the upper class to Rome. He served as secretary to Spartacus Clarus. There he could easily peep into the imperial documents which were supposed to be secret. His The Lives of the Caesar is actually a collection of biographies of different emperors from Caesar to Nero. In works, he has described the prevailing conditions of the contemporary period as Professor Burns writes about him. Mentioned that lies in the fact that he became the model of style and arrangement for historical biography during the period of humanism. Beside the above mentioned Roman historian, Miraculous Maximus, Ammianus Marilinus were also significant historiographers of the Roman period. Though most of the works of Roman historians are not available now. However, a survey of the remaining works of the Roman historians clearly indicate that they were very much influenced by the Greek historians and they made no original contribution. But at the same time, it is quite evident that their accounts were comparative and have no prejudice whatsoever. Then let's see what is the difference between the Romans and Greek historiography. The Roman historiographers were merely the followers of Greeks. They had no comparison with the Greeks, for they were very advanced in their outlook. There were many differences between two schools of historiographers. The following are the chief differences between the Greeks and Roman historiographers and history writings. The Greek history covered every aspect of human life, so their scope was very wide, but the Roman history preserved only the memory of some important events, especially those which were related to aristocracy. The Greeks discussed all the vital and significant issues of life, where the Romans did not describe the basic question of related to life. Then the Greek historiographer emphasized on finding truth, and they had analytical approach in their writings. But Romans did not make effort to inquire into cause of events, or they paid much attention towards finding truth before writing their works. Greeks did not give much importance to individual for the establishment of society, but laid importance to essence in writing of history, while the Romans were intimately attached to the monarchy. Then the Greeks clarified all the controversial issues, but the Romans did not make the efforts to solution of the intricate issues. The Greeks, in order to keep into life, raised the level of history, but the Romans' behavior towards life was incorrect and past. The Greeks opined that politics has no permanent future, and the forms of government went on changing constantly. But the Romans had faith in the permanency of monarchy, which helped a lot to the growth of culture. The Greeks had faith in the creative leadership, which contributed to the development of learning and a culture. But the Romans' history is merely the biography of great men, and they did not fill any role of culture in the development of learning. Besides being the originators of historiography, the Greeks contributed to the development of history, whereas the Roman merely borrowed historiography from the Vangish races. Greeks also referred to humanism in their works and widened the scope of history. While the Romans were confined to political and military history, they are more focused in military political events. Then reasons which contributed the Romans to lag behind. It is fact that the Romans always lag behind the Greeks as regards history. The following reasons were responsible for it. Some of historians and critics have even called them unhistorical because of their inability to stand similar to the Greeks. They did not make use of original sources, nor they made extensive tools to collect the documents. Their writing were based on the information of royal courts. The supplier of this information were also not competent and they never paid proper attention to the authenticity of the record of information. So the Romans did not have critical outlook. They only felt them content by recording the events and never restored a scientific attitude. They never paid due attention to the people of the Vangish country and never endeavored to know their feelings. Hence, their records were not based on truth. The Historico-Roman period were easygoing and they were always lost the pleasure of the court. They were not fully acquainted with the customs, manners, and trade, and were also ignorant of the lifestyle of the common people. Hence, they did not apply their personal knowledge and experience in their writings. So the Roman historiographers did not write history at the time of their conquering territories. But when they gained consciousness, it was quite late, so they paid attention on quantity rather than on quality. No doubt they had much source material, but they wasted in writing large number of books and the cost of quality. The Romans and Greek historiographers were pulls apart. The former did not pay attention to the quality of writing, whereas the latter stressed on the recording the truth. And their scope of history was quite wide because they also included the social, economic, cultural activities of human beings. So in this lecture, we have know the Roman historians, their contribution to history, as well as the comparison study of for Roman historiographers and Greek historiographers. So any historiographers, any history, we have to study at the time, the situation, and the political period is also most important. So briefly, I have explained in this lecture about the Roman historiographers, their works, as well as the comparison study of Greek and Roman historiography. So these are the books refer for further study. Thank you. Thank you very much.